Hi, my name is Nikhil Shenoy, and welcome to today's session on emergency mass communications. So what's important when an event is going on? When someone sees something, how do they say something? What are the processes involved? And how do you make sure that you save the most amount of time when every second counts? You know, this term see something, say something was actually coined by Alan Kay and Associates after 9/11. And when you talk to Mr. Kay, he'd be the first one to tell you that this is the most impactful slogan he's ever come up with, whether it was for toothpaste or any consumer packaged good. See something, say something really meant something to Mr. Kay because it was a slogan that actually saved lives. So let's talk a little bit about what's something that you might see and what's important information to get out. Now, I myself was stuck in Chicago in 2011 during a blizzard. And in this blizzard, it would have been good to know that the weather was coming, but unfortunately they sent it to your email, or maybe there was a text message that went out, and the weather changed suddenly. So it would have been good to know that the classes were closed that day. So I was actually stuck here for a couple of days. More recently, we had Hurricane Irma down in Houston, and we actually had a customer who told us that they had a tough time getting in touch with everybody, and it took 3 weeks before they knew who was where. I think we can do better than that. Now, it's important not to be too flippant because some of these situations are truly life-altering. For example, we all know about the Boston bombing and suspicious packages that in Austin that have gone on. And so, how you handle a suspicious package is completely different than a weather event. And even more different than that will be a facilities issue. Wouldn't it be great to know if something was going on before you get to the elevator? Right? And then when something does happen, as you can see the first responders in the screen, they know where to go and what to expect when they get there. So context is everything. And while some of these situations might not seem so bad, there are some where lives are truly at stake. So again, the seriousness can't be understated. This was a recent apartment fire in London, and I'm not sure that people knew the procedures of how to get out, but hundreds of people passed away. So these are very serious scenarios, and I encourage all of our facilities managers and customers and clients to really think about how are they going to save lives in these dire situations. The top of the news lately has been all about active shooting. It's a horrible fact of reality, but even in the public schools now, they have active shooter drills, which is just a sad reality that we face today. And so how do you react to an active shooter? What can actually save lives before first responders show up? So we'll talk about some of this today. And why does this matter for facilities managers, particularly in our area? Well, you hear all the headlines, but even though we're more connected, it's not like the world is getting any safer, right? In the 15 years from 2000 to 2015, there have been 10 times as many active shooter incidents on a rolling basis. And this is relevant to the office place because almost half of all these incidents have occurred at work. So what I want you to think about is all the different types of emergencies that are out there and how you would react to each of them. What procedures are in place? What systems do you use? Do you have different systems for each one of these things? How do you get the word out? How do you know when something's going on? How do you find out about a facilities issue today? Right? So that's what we're gonna focus on in this session. And there is actually a gap between the information that people see and the time that administrators receive it. So how do we close this gap? The components that we're going to talk about are people, processes, and technology. That when used together, they equal preparedness for your facility to make sure you can respond effectively in a coordinated, disciplined way and save lives when it matters by getting the right information to the right people at the right time, which equates to saying something. So when someone sees something, they can say something. And so what we'll cover here are where we are in emergency management, what happens during an emergency, and how technology can help us close those gaps. And then we'll end with some concrete steps that you can take to make your facility response safer and smarter for these situations. So here's the trusty fire alarm. Think about that for a second. Fire alarm. So it's the same alarm every single time, regardless of the scenario, and it's always for fire. Well, we just covered how there's a bunch of different types of scenarios where you might want to tell everybody something. So again, without much context and having a generic blaring alarm could actually be a safety issue. For example, in some active shooter incidents lately, people would pull the fire alarm and then they'd know the procedures and gun people down. I think we can do better than that. On top of that, there are custom keys used to maintain it. It's wide open, so you don't know who pulled it. It's completely anonymous, and it's stationary. As you watch this webinar, look around right now and see if you can find where the fire alarm is. You've probably walked past it hundreds of times without even knowing it, but you have to know exactly where it is when it counts the most. And so a lot of these technologies haven't evolved. I mean, this movie is 20 years old, right? And yet, while it might be kind of funny to look at the computer and the binders on the wall, a lot of our safety procedures haven't evolved since then. How do we update this information? How do we know when something changes that people are aware of the updates? So for example, I mean, at Kastle headquarters, our mustering plans tell us to go to the field next door. But if you went there now, you'd find an apartment building and a parking lot. So it's important to update this information and make sure that you can get to the right information to the right people at the right time. So IFMA, the International Facilities Management Association, published a book on this a couple of years ago. And what they talk about is that the role of the facility manager is protecting and continuing business in a highly complex and high-stakes way. And of the 10 instructions that they take for emergency preparedness, 8 are directly related to getting information out as quickly as possible. And yet, in the survey they conducted, fully 1/3 of all facility managers don't have any systems in place whatsoever. FEMA, from Homeland Security, also talks about emergency preparedness, and what they suggest is engaging in the workplace as a way to build morale and trust. So as facilities managers, there is a responsibility to create the best possible workplace, and safety and security and giving people a role in it directly enhances their workplace experience. And so by engaging at work, they found that there's a significant increase in engagement and that people are likely to take those learnings to other parts of their lives as well. Finally, Homeland Security also released an active shooter response guide. So what's interesting there is that they actually suggest a bunch of different types of information that facilities managers are responsible for reporting to first responders. So think to yourself, as a facilities manager or somebody who is responsible for people in a workplace environment, how are you going to get this information? How do you know where the shooter is, who needs help, where they are, and the number of potential victims? How are you going to get the information out? And they actually directly spell out facility manager responsibilities. And again, recall that almost 1/3 or over 1/3 of all facilities don't even have notification systems, and yet DHS is expecting them to activate it. So this is something that needs to be addressed as soon as possible because it is an assumed responsibility of facility managers. And yet, the systems that are available get the word out slowly. Please bear with me here. This could take a while. But imagine now somebody sees something. What percent of those people do you think know who the property manager is to call? They might see something and then try to say something to the administrator. And assuming that they're able to do that, then the administrator oftentimes has to walk across the hall or down a couple of different floors to get to a central station. And then from that workstation, they have to log into a password that they rarely ever use, and then send it out to dedicated incident commanders. So now the word gets out to those people who are then expected to announce it broadly by their own systems, by email or whatever other systems those office workers might have. So in a property, for example, a multi-tenant office building that's got 20 different offices in it, that's where the communication ends, and it's difficult to get that word out. So how are these systems going to, how are we going to improve on these systems? One thing we can assume today is that smartphones are basically like plumbing. You can kind of assume that everybody has one. If you look at the room that you're in right now or your colleagues, poll them. Does anybody not have an Android or iPhone at this point? Even BlackBerry devices are on Android. So kind of like you can assume that there's going to be electricity at your site, there's going to be plumbing. You can pretty much assume at this point that smartphone availability is nearly ubiquitous. And how people use those phones has also changed. So phone might even be a misnomer for the device, right? A mobile device is 5 times as likely to be used for texting per Nielsen. So communicating with people in the right way is also incredibly important and something that you should consider in any system that you use. Because 7 minutes is actually a really long time. The point of that is that you want to know that every second counts. And that imagine now, noises are going on, there might be some smells that you don't know. All that information, so getting that context before first responders arrive is incredibly important for people's well-being during these scenarios. So again, you want to think about systems that not only save time, but give people peace of mind and comfort and the information they need to give themselves the best possible chance of leaving unscathed or minimizing damage. And so today we rely on incident commanders to get the word out to people. But why don't we flip it on its head? Why don't we use all the eyes and ears on this page in a way that matters? And yet you want to be careful because you could go too far the other way, right? Enrolling all these people is great. So one question that I'll hear a lot is, why don't we just use Twitter? Or why don't we just use a mass texting platform? Let's talk a little bit about why those open platforms have some issues. So something like Twitter, for example, this is the 2017 reported shooting at Madison Square Garden. Sergeant Donald said, "Bad information, no shots have been fired," at 5:56 p.m. And people keep talking about it for over half an hour until at 6:20, he says, "Additionally, we've responded to numerous calls and they're all unfounded." So on Twitter, not only is it difficult to filter out the noise of various tweets and dog pictures and whatever else, the conversation never ends. And getting bad information out there isn't great, okay? And it's also anonymous and difficult to track and audit. And at the same time, having a robust system in place means that you're able to kind of control it. So January of this year, there was a missile alert crisis that went out in Hawaii, but it was a false alarm. And so you can see the message here. So people did what they said to do. It said it's not a drill, very specifically. So people hid, they called their parents, they called their grandparents, and it was chaos. But because the governor forgot his Twitter password and whatever system they had, they weren't able to recall the message. So these things directly impact people's lives and well-being. And so again, while the word gets out slowly in some of the systems you might see today, it's equally important to have something that is controlled and a bit locked down to give that best possible experience. And so that's the better way. Something that's mobile first and crowdsourced. So as soon as someone sees something, everyone can see something. And you have a few administrative controls in there so you can end the conversation in a timely way or manage the situation while it's going on and get the most relevant information out to the right people at the right time. The idea is to close that connectivity gap by enrolling people, processes, and technology to bring it all together for the ultimate preparedness. So what needs to be true for these types of systems? They should be fast. They should be context aware, so you have different information for each different type. So instead of just a blaring fire alarm, you might have a package incident where you only get a few people involved, and then you send one message out. Or you might have an active shooter situation where you want people to kind of talk about the information as it changes in a non-anonymous way. Maybe even sending pictures or things that are relevant only to this scenario. Not dog pictures, no regular tweets. It's just a chat session about what's going on. And that is true all-to-all connectivity, empowering everybody in the building and enrolling them in their own safety. At the same time, you want to have some controls. Can you lock and unlock the building? As we were developing this solution, we worked with the Metropolitan Police Department, and they told us something called a key salad. They'd receive a ton of different keys, whether they're metal keys or access keys or what have you, and they'd have to figure out how to get through the building once it was locked down. But because we're tightly integrated with access control, you can lock or unlock the building in a dynamic way as the information changes. It's also important to have dynamic information. So for example, can you poll everybody and see who's safe or who needs help? And then when people report back to you, can you get in touch with those people? So having that database already linked to your access control database means that it seamlessly collects all the information you need and keeps it updated. And then finally, auditing and reporting has never been more important. So making sure that you have everything that's in context in one place that's easy to access and give that to the people that need the information after the incident is over is incredibly important. And so here are some steps to take away. Assess your current situation. What procedures are in place and who do you use? Actually try and walk maybe with a tenant on what they would do if something went wrong. If their answer is to pull the fire alarm, think about every single situation, right? So really understand how that information is spread to occupants, right? So once there's a fire alarm, do people really all leave right away or do they assume that it's a drill? How do they know it's a drill versus a real fire alarm? And then finally, make sure you update your contact information, okay? So preparation is going to save lives. It's going to save time, save minutes when every second counts. At the end of the day, the most important thing you can do, and one of the most concrete steps you can take, is simply getting a mobile emergency notification system in place. So again, all these this presentation has the links to each of these things. Kastle's website has an active shooter preparedness guide that'll help you assess and understand your needs. And in conclusion, let's do a better job and save people's lives when it matters. Updating our using the latest technology, getting the right people in place, and then putting the processes there to bring it all together with the right technology is a more prepared, safer, better place to work.